The auctioneer's gavel cracked against the wooden podium like a gunshot, and Zelda Lawrence felt her stomach drop as every eye in the dusty town square turned toward her. It was the summer of 1882 in Wood River, Nebraska, and she stood on that platform with her chin held high despite the humiliation burning through her veins, her dark hair pinned severely back and her calloused hands clasped before her worn cotton dress. "Now, gentlemen, this here is Miss Zelda Lawrence, formerly cook at the Grand Hotel in Omaha," the auctioneer announced, his voice carrying across the crowd of ranchers, farmers, and drifters who had gathered for the labor auction. Her employer vouches for her biscuits, her roasts, and her ability to feed a crew of 20 without breaking a sweat. "We are starting the bidding at $50 for a 6-month contract." Zelda's eyes swept over the assembled men, noting their weathered faces and assessing gazes. Some looked at her with pity, others with calculation, weighing whether her cooking skills were worth the investment. She had never imagined her life would come to this, standing on an auction block like a prize mare, but the hotel in Omaha had gone bankrupt 3 weeks prior, and she had no family, no prospects, and exactly 17 cents to her name. The labor auction was the only way she could guarantee room and board while earning enough to eventually strike out on her own again. A portly man in a fine suit raised his hand. $60. I need a cook for my lumber operation. $70, called another voice from the back. The bidding continued, climbing steadily as Zelda tried to keep her expression neutral. She knew what this was. A transaction, nothing more. Whoever one would expect 3 meals a day, probably baked goods for special occasions, and maybe laundry and cleaning on top of it all. That was the way of things when a woman had no other options. $100. A new voice rang out, deep and measured, cutting through the incremental raises like a knife through butter. The crowd parted slightly, and Zelda found herself looking at a tall man in his mid-20s, wearing dusty trail clothes and a black hat pulled low over his eyes. He stood with the easy confidence of someone who knew his own worth, his broad shoulders outlined against the harsh Nebraska sun. Something about the way he looked at her was different from the others, not assessing her like livestock, but simply observing. $100 from Samuel Barrett of the Barrett Ranch, the auctioneer confirmed. "Do I hear 110? The silence stretched. $100 was a considerable sum for a 6-month cooking contract, more than most of these men could spare. The lumber operation owner shook his head and stepped back, and the auctioneer raised his gavel. "Sold to Mr. Barrett for $100. Miss Lawrence, please step down and complete the paperwork." Zelda descended the platform on shaking legs, her mind racing. She knew the Barrett Ranch by reputation. It was one of the larger cattle operations in the region, sprawling across several thousand acres of prairie. She had heard Samuel Barrett's name mentioned in town before, always with a measure of respect. He was young to be running such a spread, but apparently he had inherited it from his father 2 years back and had been managing it successfully ever since. She signed the contract with a steady hand, committing herself to 6 months of labor in exchange for room, board, and $75 to be paid at the end of the term. The remaining $25 of Samuel's bid went to the auction house as their fee. When she finished, she turned to find him waiting a respectful distance away, his hat now in his hands revealing sandy brown hair and startlingly blue eyes. "Miss Lawrence," he said, his voice carrying a hint of the South, perhaps Texas or Arkansas. "I have a wagon just down the street. If you have belongings to collect, I can wait." "Everything I own is in this bag," Zelda replied, lifting the small canvas satchel at her feet. It contained 2 spare dresses, some undergarments, a hairbrush, and the small Bible her mother had given her before dying of fever 10 years ago. Something flickered in Samuel's eyes, sympathy perhaps, or understanding, but he simply nodded. Then let's head out. It is about an hour's ride to the ranch. They walked through Wood River's Main Street, past the general store and the saloon, the post office and the church. Zelda had arrived in this town only yesterday on the train from Omaha, and she had spent last night in the boarding house using the last of her money. Now she was leaving with a stranger, bound by a legal contract to cook for him and his ranch hands for half a year. The wagon was a sturdy affair, clearly built for work rather than comfort. Samuel helped her up onto the bench seat with careful courtesy, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they rolled out of town onto the open prairie, Zelda stole glances at her new employer. He had a strong profile, with a straight nose and a firm jaw shadowed with a few days' worth of stubble. His hands on the reins were capable and scarred with the marks of hard work. He seemed lost in thought, his eyes on the horizon where the grasslands met the endless blue sky. "Mr. Barrett," Zelda began, then hesitated. "Yes, Miss Lawrence. What happened to your previous cook?" A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Old Pete died 3 weeks back. Heart gave out in his sleep. He had been with the ranch since my father's time, and there is nobody who can make coffee like he did. I am sorry for your loss." Samuel glanced at her, and she saw genuine grief in his eyes. "Pete was a good man. He taught me how to play cards and how to read the weather. The hands miss him terribly, and I confess the meals have been sorry affairs since he passed. We have been taking turns at the cooking, but none of us have the knack for it." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels and the jingling of the harness. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, golden grass rippling in the wind like waves on an ocean. Zelda had grown up in St. Louis, spent her adult years in Omaha, and she had never seen so much open space. It was both beautiful and terrifying. "How many men am I cooking for?" she asked finally. "6 hands plus myself, so 7 in total, though during roundup we sometimes hire on extra help." Samuel paused, then added, "The house has a separate kitchen and a dining room. You will have your own bedroom in the main house, not in the bunkhouse with the men." Zelda felt a small measure of relief. She had been wondering about the sleeping arrangements, worried she might be relegated to a barn or a shared space. "That is considerate of you. It is only proper, Miss Lawrence." Another silence fell, but this one felt less awkward. Zelda found herself relaxing slightly, lulled by the rhythm of the journey. Samuel did not seem like a cruel man or even a particularly demanding one. Perhaps this arrangement would not be as terrible as she had feared. When the ranch came into view, Zelda sat up straighter, taking in the sight. The main house was a 2-story structure built of timber with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings dotted the property. A large barn, a bunkhouse, a stable, and various sheds. Corrals held horses and cattle, and in the distance, she could see more cattle grazing across the rolling hills. "It is a fine spread," she said honestly. "My father built it from nothing," Samuel replied, and she heard the pride in his voice. "Started with 100 head of cattle and a dream. Now we run about 2,000 head and supply beef to the railroad camps and the Indian agencies." He guided the wagon up to the main house and set the brake, then hopped down and came around to help Zelda descend. As her feet touched the ground, the front door of the house banged open and a stocky man with a grizzled beard emerged, followed by several others. "Boss, you got us a cook," the bearded man called out, his weathered face breaking into a grin. "I did, Thomas. This is Miss Zelda Lawrence from Omaha." "Miss Lawrence, this is Thomas Hayes, my foreman." Samuel proceeded to introduce the other hands. Young Jake Morrison, who could not have been more than 19, the twin brothers Carl and Charlie Davis, the quiet Mexican vaquero named Miguel Rodriguez, and a lean older man called William Tucker who had kind eyes and silver in his hair. They all greeted her with varying degrees of enthusiasm and curiosity, clearly eager for decent meals again. Zelda felt the weight of their expectations settling on her shoulders. "Let me show you the house," Samuel said, picking up her bag before she could protest. He led her up the porch steps and through the front door into a spacious main room with a stone fireplace and simple but sturdy furniture. The place had the feel of a home maintained by men who tried their best but lacked a woman's touch. Everything was clean enough but stark, missing the small details that made a house welcoming. The kitchen was through a doorway to the right, and Zelda's professional eye immediately cataloged its features. A large cast iron stove dominated one wall, with a good-sized work table in the center and shelves lined with dishes, pots, and pans. A door led to what appeared to be a well-stocked pantry. Windows above the sink let in plenty of light. "This is excellent," Zelda said, running her hand along the work table. "I can do a great deal with this space." Samuel looked pleased. "Pete kept it organized. I have made sure to maintain his system. The pantry has flour, sugar, salt, dried beans, and preserves. We have a smokehouse out back with bacon and ham, a springhouse for keeping things cold, and chickens for eggs. There is a vegetable garden behind the house that could use some attention, but it still has potatoes, onions, and carrots coming in." Zelda nodded, her mind already planning meals. "When would you like supper?" Samuel held up a hand. "Miss Lawrence, before we discuss meals, let me show you your room and give you time to settle in. You have had a long day." He led her upstairs to a small but comfortable bedroom with a real bed, not just a cot, a wardrobe, a washstand, and a window overlooking the prairie. Zelda set her bag down and turned to find Samuel standing in the doorway, his expression serious. "Miss Lawrence, there is something I need to say before we go any further." Her stomach tightened. Here it came, the catch she had been waiting for. Men did not pay $100 for a cook without expecting something beyond meals. Samuel seemed to sense her tension because he stayed firmly in the doorway, making no move to enter the room. "I bid on your contract because the ranch needs a cook, and you clearly have the skills we require. But I want you to understand something. You are free to cook only if you want to. If you decide you would rather do other work, or if you want to leave before the 6 months are up, you can. I would not hold you to that contract against your will." Zelda stared at him, certain she had misheard. "I am sorry, what?" "The contract we signed is legal and binding, yes, but I am not the kind of man who would force a woman to labor for me if she is unhappy. If you choose to stay and cook, I would be grateful. If you choose otherwise, I will help you get wherever you want to go and give you enough money to start fresh." "But you paid $100, Zelda said slowly, trying to understand his angle. "I did. And if you fulfill the contract, you will earn your $75 as agreed. But if you leave, I will survive the financial loss. Money can be earned back. A person's dignity and freedom, however, once taken, are not so easily restored." Samuel met her eyes steadily. "I will not own another human being in any capacity, Miss Lawrence. You are an employee, and you will be treated with the respect that entails." Zelda felt something crack open in her chest, a tight knot of fear and shame she had been carrying since she first learned about the labor auction. She had been bracing herself for demands, for entitled expectations, for the grinding reality of being at someone else's mercy. Instead, this stranger was offering her a choice. "Why?" she whispered. Samuel's expression softened. "My mother was a good woman who taught me right from wrong before she died. She would rise from her grave and haunt me if I treated another person poorly. And beyond that, Miss Lawrence, it is simply the decent thing to do. They stood there for a moment, the afternoon sun slanting through the window and painting golden squares on the wooden floor. Then Zelda squared her shoulders and lifted her chin. "I will cook for you, Mr. Barrett, not because a contract says I must, but because you have given me a choice. That is worth more than you might realize." A slow smile spread across Samuel's face, transforming his serious features into something warm and genuinely pleased. "Then I am grateful, Miss Lawrence. Take whatever time you need to settle in, and we can discuss the particulars of the job over supper. I warn you, though, expectations are high. Thomas has not stopped talking about the possibility of biscuits since we left town this morning." Zelda found herself smiling back despite everything. "I think I can manage biscuits." After Samuel left, Zelda unpacked her meager belongings and washed her face and hands in the basin on the washstand. She changed into her other dress, a slightly less worn calico in a faded blue, and pinned her hair back more neatly. Then she descended to the kitchen, rolled up her sleeves, and began to explore the space that would be her domain for the next 6 months. The pantry was indeed well stocked, and she found everything she needed to make a solid evening meal. She started a fire in the stove, set a pot of beans to warming. Someone had at least had the foresight to soak beans overnight, and began mixing dough for biscuits. Her hands fell into the familiar rhythm of work, measuring and kneading, and she felt some of the tension drain from her shoulders. Cooking had always been her refuge. As a girl, she had learned at her mother's side, and after her mother's death, those skills had kept her fed and employed. She had worked in boarding houses and hotels, fed railroad crews and harvest workers, and through it all, she had taken pride in her ability to create something good from simple ingredients. A well-cooked meal could bring comfort, build community, and transform an ordinary day into something special. As the biscuits baked and filled the kitchen with their golden scent, Zelda found salt pork in the smokehouse and fried it up crisp, then used the drippings to make gravy. She discovered canned tomatoes in the pantry and green beans from the garden, which she seasoned with a bit of bacon and onion. It was simple fare, but it was hot and plentiful and made with care. When she rang the dinner bell beside the back door, the ranch hands appeared with gratifying speed, washing up at the pump outside before filing into the dining room. Samuel came down from upstairs where he had been working on ranch accounts, and they all took their seats at the long table. Zelda served the food family style, setting the platters and bowls in the center so the men could help themselves. She had learned long ago that ranch hands appreciated abundance, and she had made sure there was plenty of everything. The first bite brought silence, and then young Jake Morrison groaned aloud. "Lord have mercy, these are actual biscuits. Real, proper biscuits." "Mind your manners," Thomas admonished, but he was grinning as he reached for a third biscuit and slathered it with butter and honey. "Miss Lawrence, this is excellent," William Tucker said earnestly. "I had almost forgotten what decent gravy tasted like." The twins, Carl and Charlie, were too busy eating to comment, but their expressions spoke volumes. Even Miguel, who tended toward quietness, nodded appreciatively and complimented her seasoning of the green beans in careful English. Samuel caught her eye from the head of the table and raised his coffee cup in a small toast. "Welcome to the Barrett Ranch, Miss Lawrence. I believe you are going to fit in just fine." Over the following weeks, Zelda established herself as an indispensable part of the ranch's daily rhythm. She rose before dawn to start the stove and prepare breakfast, served hearty lunches to fuel the men through their afternoon labors, and created suppers that had them gathering eagerly around the table each evening. She baked bread twice a week, made pies from preserves and dried fruit, and even managed to coax the neglected vegetable garden back into productivity. The ranch hands treated her with unfailing respect, perhaps because Samuel had made it clear from the start that she was to be regarded as a professional equal, not a servant. They thanked her for meals, helped with heavy lifting when she needed it, and even pitched in with dish washing after supper without being asked. Samuel himself was an interesting enigma. He worked as hard as any of his men, rising early to ride out and check on the cattle, mending fences, breaking horses, and handling the endless tasks that kept a ranch running. But he also managed the business side of things, maintaining correspondence with cattle buyers, tracking expenses, and planning for the future. Zelda often saw lamplight under his office door late at night as he worked over his ledgers. Despite his workload, he always made time to thank her for meals and ask if she needed anything. He had a quiet sense of humor that emerged in unexpected moments, and she found herself looking forward to their brief conversations. There was something solid and trustworthy about Samuel Barrett, a fundamental decency that showed in both his words and his actions. One evening in late August, about 6 weeks after Zelda's arrival, a violent thunderstorm rolled across the prairie. The wind howled around the house, rain lashed the windows, and lightning split the sky with brilliant cracks that made the horses scream in the stable. Zelda lay in her bed listening to the storm's fury, hoping the roof would hold. Around midnight, she heard footsteps in the hallway and then a quiet knock on her door. "Miss Lawrence, are you awake?" Samuel's voice was barely audible over the storm. Zelda grabbed her shawl and opened the door to find Samuel standing there in his shirt sleeves, his hair damp. "What is wrong?" "Part of the barn roof has torn loose, and we need to get the horses moved to the stable before the whole thing comes down. I did not want you to be alarmed if you heard us running around." "Can I help?" Samuel shook his head. "No need. Just stay inside where it is safe. We will have it handled shortly." But Zelda found herself pulling on her boots and following him downstairs anyway. She might be a cook, but she had grown up around horses, and she was not going to huddle in her room while everyone else fought the storm. The scene outside was chaotic. The barn's roof was indeed partially collapsed, and the frightened horses inside were kicking their stalls and neighing in panic. The ranch hands were already working to lead them out one by one through the driving rain toward the more secure stable building. Zelda grabbed a halter and went for one of the more nervous mares, speaking softly to calm her. The mare rolled her eyes and tossed her head, but Zelda persisted, finally getting the halter on and leading the animal out into the storm. Rain immediately soaked through her nightgown and shawl, plastering her hair to her face, but she focused on keeping the mare steady as she guided her to the stable. She made 3 trips in total, helping to move horses while Samuel and the hands worked to secure the barn's damaged roof as much as possible. By the time the last horse was safe and the immediate crisis had passed, everyone was soaked and shivering, but the animals were secure. Back in the house, Thomas built up the fire while Zelda put on coffee and started making food. It was 2 in the morning, but everyone was too keyed up to sleep, and hot coffee and warm bread would help chase away the chill. Samuel appeared in the kitchen doorway, having changed into dry clothes, carrying a blanket. "Miss Lawrence, you should get out of those wet things before you catch your death." Zelda looked down at herself and realized she was dripping on the kitchen floor, still wearing her soaked nightgown with her shawl hanging heavy with water. Her face flushed hot. In the urgency of the moment, she had not thought about how inappropriate it was for her to be running around in her nightclothes. "I will go change," she said, starting to move past him. Samuel stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "Miss Lawrence, Zelda, thank you. You did not have to help with the horses, but you did anyway. That took courage." She met his eyes and saw genuine appreciation there, along with something else she could not quite name. I could not just hide in my room while everyone else worked. Most people would have, Samuel said quietly. He handed her the blanket. Go get warm and dry. The coffee will still be here when you come back down. Zelda changed quickly into her spare dress and dried her hair as best she could with a towel, then returned to the kitchen to find the ranch hands gathered around the table, talking about the storm. She served coffee and warm bread with butter, and gradually the tense energy in the room settled into something more relaxed. That was a near thing, Thomas said, shaking his head. If that whole roof had come down with the horses still inside, we could have lost them all. We will need to do some serious repairs come morning, Samuel added. But everyone did well tonight, including our cook, who apparently knows her way around horses. The men raised their coffee cups in appreciation, and Zelda felt a warm glow that had nothing to do with the fire. She had been accepted here, truly accepted, not as hired help but as part of the ranch's family. As the weeks turned into months, Zelda found herself settling into life at the Barrett Ranch in ways she had not anticipated. The work was hard but satisfying, and the rhythm of the days had a comforting predictability. She woke with the sun, created meals that brought joy to hardworking men, and fell into bed at night with the pleasant exhaustion that came from honest labor. But more than that, she found herself drawn to Samuel Barrett in ways that both excited and terrified her. She noticed how he always checked to make sure she had enough firewood for the stove, how he brought her the first wildflowers of autumn with an almost shy smile, how he listened when she talked about her dreams of maybe one day opening her own restaurant in a city where she could cook not out of necessity, but out of passion for the craft. He shared his own dreams too, talking about expanding the ranch, improving the breeding stock, maybe starting a horse training operation on the side. He spoke about his parents, both gone now, and the responsibility he felt to honor their legacy. He had hopes and fears, and a vision for the future that went beyond simple survival. They began taking evening walks together after supper, strolling around the ranch property as the sun set in brilliant oranges and purples across the prairie sky. Samuel showed her the place where his parents were buried on a small hill overlooking the valley, and Zelda shared stories of her mother and the father she had never known, who had died before she was born. It was during one of these walks in early October that Samuel stopped on a small bridge over a creek that ran through the property and turned to face her. "Zelda," he said, his voice serious, "your 6-month contract is almost up. It expires at the end of November." Her heart sank. She had been trying not to think about that deadline, about the fact that this peaceful interlude in her life had an expiration date. "I know. I do not want you to leave," Samuel continued, his blue eyes intense on hers. "The ranch needs you, the men need you, and I need you. But more than that, I want you to stay because you choose to, not because of any contract or obligation." "Samuel," he held up a hand. "Let me finish, please. Over these past months, you have become more than just an employee. You have become a friend, a confidant, and someone I look forward to seeing every single day. The house feels warm when you are in it. The meals we share have become the highlight of my day, not because of the food, though Lord knows you are a magnificent cook, but because I get to sit across from you and talk about everything and nothing." Zelda's breath caught as Samuel reached out and gently took her hand. "I know I am just a rancher with dirt under my fingernails and a mortgaged property. I do not have much to offer beyond hard work and an uncertain future. But if you would consider staying, not as my cook, but as my partner, my wife, I swear I would spend every day of my life making sure you never regretted it." The prairie wind rustled through the grass, and somewhere in the distance cattle lowed. Zelda looked at this good, honest man who had given her dignity when she had none, who had offered her choice when she had been powerless, who had shown her through 100 small kindnesses what it meant to be truly valued. "You really do not know what you are asking, do you?" she said softly. Samuel's expression flickered with uncertainty. "What do you mean?" "You are offering me everything I never dared to dream of. A home, a partnership, a future. You are offering me love, Samuel, and that is the most valuable thing anyone has ever tried to give me." She squeezed his hand, tears pricking her eyes. "Yes, yes, I will marry you. I will stay not because of a contract or obligation, but because somewhere in the last 4 months I fell completely in love with you." The joy that transformed Samuel's face was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and Zelda melted into his embrace, feeling safe and cherished in a way she had never experienced before. "We should probably tell the men," Samuel murmured into her hair. "Though I suspect Thomas has a betting pool going about when I would finally work up the courage to propose." Zelda laughed, the sound bright and free. "He does. Jake let it slip last week. Thomas bet on October, so you just won him $20. Samuel pulled back to look at her, his eyes dancing with amusement. "You knew there was a betting pool and did not tell me. I thought it was charming. Besides, I was not entirely sure you would actually propose. You are often so proper and restrained." "Proper and restrained," Samuel repeated, then suddenly swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she shrieked with laughter. "I will show you proper and restrained." He set her down gently and kissed her, a sweet, tender kiss that promised years of partnership and love. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Zelda rested her forehead against his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. "When should we get married?" she asked. "As soon as the circuit preacher comes through, if that suits you. He usually makes his rounds in November, so it should not be long. And in the meantime," Samuel stepped back and offered his arm. "In the meantime, you continue being the magnificent woman you are, cooking if you choose to, but not because you must. We will plan a future together as equals." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and when they entered the kitchen where the ranch hands were gathered for after-supper coffee, Thomas took one look at their joined hands and their glowing faces and whooped. "I knew it. Pay up, boys. I called October." Money exchanged hands amid laughter and congratulations. Young Jake pumped Samuel's hand enthusiastically while William clapped him on the back, and even quiet Miguel offered a warm smile and a heartfelt blessing in Spanish. The twins insisted this called for a celebration, and broke out a bottle of whiskey that had been hidden in the bunkhouse for special occasions. That night, as Zelda lay in her bed for one of the last times as an unmarried woman, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. She had stood on an auction block expecting to be sold into drudgery, and instead, she had found a home and a love deeper than she had imagined possible. The circuit preacher, a jovial man named Reverend Thomas Whitfield, arrived at the ranch on a cold November morning, bringing with him news from the surrounding settlements and a mail packet from town. Samuel had sent word ahead requesting the preacher's services for a wedding, and Reverend Whitfield was delighted to oblige. They held the ceremony in the main room of the ranch house, with the ranch hands as witnesses. Zelda wore a new dress that Samuel had ordered specially from the general store in Wood River, a deep green wool that brought out the color of her eyes. She had never owned anything so fine. Samuel wore his best suit, which he had not touched since his father's funeral, and he looked both nervous and impossibly handsome. Zelda had no family to stand with her, so William Tucker offered to give her away, and she accepted gratefully. As she took his arm and walked across the room to where Samuel waited, she felt the weight of the ranch hands' affectionate regard, these men who had become like brothers to her over the past months. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising partnership, respect, and love. Samuel's voice was steady as he pledged to honor her dreams as well as his own, to support her in all her endeavors, and to build a life together based on mutual choice rather than obligation. Zelda promised to stand beside him through hardship and plenty, to bring warmth and light to their home, and to love him with all the strength of her considerable heart. When Reverend Whitfield pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed her with such tender joy that Zelda felt tears slip down her cheeks. The ranch hands erupted in cheers and applause, and someone started playing a harmonica, filling the room with lively music. They celebrated with a feast Zelda had prepared beforehand with help from the men, who had learned enough from watching her to assist with the simpler tasks. There was roasted beef and potatoes, fresh bread, 3 kinds of pie, and a cake that Jake had attempted to decorate with somewhat lopsided frosting flowers. It was perfect. As evening fell and the celebration wound down, the ranch hands tactfully retreated to the bunkhouse, leaving Samuel and Zelda alone in the house that was now truly their home. Samuel built up the fire while Zelda changed out of her wedding dress into her nightgown, her hands trembling slightly with anticipation and nervousness. When she emerged from the bedroom, Samuel was waiting in the main room, having also changed into more comfortable clothes. He crossed to her and took her hands gently. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Zelda replied honestly. "Samuel, when I stood on that auction block, I thought my life was over in any way that mattered. I thought I would spend the rest of my years simply surviving, getting by. You gave me so much more than that." Samuel cupped her face in his hands. "You gave me more too. This house was just a building before you came. You made it a home. You brought laughter and warmth and life into spaces that had been cold and empty." He kissed her then, a deeper kiss than the chaste one at the ceremony, and Zelda wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing close. They made their way to the bedroom together, and in the privacy of their marriage bed, they learned each other with tenderness and passion, creating new memories that would sustain them through all the years to come. The first winter of their marriage brought heavy snows that blanketed the prairie in white and kept everyone close to home. Zelda learned what it meant to be a rancher's wife, the endless small tasks that kept a household running, the careful management of supplies to last through the lean months, the constant vigilance required to keep animals and people safe in brutal weather. But she also learned the joy of waking up beside the man she loved, of sharing quiet mornings over coffee before the day began, of building a partnership based on genuine affection and respect. Samuel consulted her on ranch decisions, valuing her practical intelligence and business sense. Zelda discovered she had a knack for bookkeeping and took over managing the ranch accounts, freeing Samuel to focus on the livestock and land management. They developed routines and rhythms, small domestic rituals that bound them together. Samuel always brought in firewood without being asked, anticipating Zelda's needs. Zelda always had hot coffee waiting when Samuel came in from the morning chores, knowing he needed it to face the day ahead. They read to each other in the evenings from whatever books they could acquire, sharing stories and ideas and dreams. Spring brought new life to the ranch. Calves were born, and Zelda found herself helping with difficult births, learning yet another new skill. The vegetable garden burst into productivity under her care, and she began experimenting with new preserving techniques to ensure they would have plenty stored for the next winter. In late May, Zelda realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another few weeks to be certain, then shared the news with Samuel one evening after supper. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for: joy, wonder, and a fierce protective tenderness that made her heart swell. "Are you frightened?" he asked, holding her close. "A little," Zelda admitted. "But mostly I am excited. I want this, Samuel. I want a family with you. We will get through this together," he promised. "Whatever you need, whatever I can do to help, you only have to ask." The ranch hands were thrilled by the news of the coming baby. They became even more protective of Zelda, insisting she not lift heavy things or overwork herself. Thomas appointed himself the chief worrier, constantly asking if she was feeling well and if she needed anything. Young Jake started carving a cradle in his spare time, his inexperienced hands creating something that was perhaps not perfectly smooth, but was made with obvious love. As summer progressed and Zelda's belly swelled with new life, she and Samuel talked endlessly about the future. They made plans to expand the house, adding more bedrooms for the children they hoped would come. They discussed education and values, what kind of parents they wanted to be. "I want our children to know they always have choices," Samuel said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I want them to feel empowered to shape their own destinies, the way I tried to give you a choice when you first arrived." Zelda leaned her head on his shoulder. "I want them to know the value of honest work and to treat everyone with dignity regardless of their station in life. I want them to be kind." "They will be," Samuel said confidently, placing his hand on her belly. "With you as their mother, how could they be anything else?" Their son was born on a cold January morning in 1884, entering the world with a lusty cry that announced his vigorous health. The birth was attended by Mrs. Henderson, the midwife from Wood River, who Samuel had brought out to the ranch a week before when it became clear the baby would arrive soon. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Zelda thought she could not endure another contraction, but Samuel stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and whispering encouragements. When Mrs. Henderson finally placed the squalling infant in Zelda's arms, she looked down at his red, scrunched-up face and felt a love so profound it almost hurt. "He is perfect," Samuel breathed, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Stephen William Barrett, the first name after Samuel's father and the middle name after William Tucker, who had given Zelda away at her wedding. Stephen was a healthy baby with a good appetite and surprisingly strong lungs, and he quickly became the center of the ranch's universe. The ranch hands doted on the baby shamelessly. Thomas carved him toys, Miguel sang him Spanish lullabies, and the twins could be found making ridiculous faces to elicit baby smiles. William became an honorary grandfather, holding Stephen with practiced ease that spoke of his own children long grown and moved away. Even young Jake, now 21 and courting a girl from town, proved surprisingly adept at soothing the baby when he fussed. Zelda navigated new motherhood with the same practical competence she brought to everything else, though she was grateful for the help and support of the men around her. Samuel proved to be a devoted father, getting up for nighttime feedings so Zelda could rest, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours simply holding his son and talking to him about the ranch and the land they would someday share. As Stephen grew from infant to toddler, the Barrett Ranch continued to prosper. Samuel's careful management and Zelda's financial acumen allowed them to slowly pay down the mortgage and even begin expanding their herd. They hired 2 more hands, built a new barn to replace the one damaged in that long-ago storm, and purchased additional grazing land. In the spring of 1886, Zelda gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah Marie. Sarah was a quieter baby than Stephen had been, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined chin. Stephen, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister and could often be found trying to share his toys with her or patting her head with sticky toddler hands. Life fell into a new rhythm, busier than before but full of love and laughter. The house that had once been a bachelor's domain was now truly a home, filled with the sounds of children playing, the smells of baking bread and simmering stews, the comfortable chaos of a growing family. One evening in late summer, after the children had been put to bed and the ranch had settled into nighttime quiet, Zelda and Samuel sat together on the porch swing that he had built for their second anniversary. The prairie stretched before them under a sky full of stars, and the air was warm with the lingering heat of the day. "You ever think about that day at the auction?" Samuel asked quietly, his arm around her shoulders. Zelda considered the question. "Sometimes. It feels like a lifetime ago, like it happened to a different person." "In many ways it did," Samuel said. "You have grown and changed so much since then. We both have." "I was so afraid that day," Zelda admitted. "So convinced that my life was over, that I would spend the rest of my days in drudgery and servitude. I could never have imagined this." She gestured to encompass the ranch, the house, the sleeping children inside, the life they had built together. "You once told me that I did not know what I was asking when I proposed," Samuel said. "Do you remember?" "I remember. I think I am starting to understand now. I was not just asking you to marry me. I was asking you to take a leap of faith, to trust that we could build something real and lasting together despite the unusual way we met. That took courage." Zelda shifted to look at him. "It took courage from you too. You took a chance on me when you made that bid, offering me freedom when you could have demanded servitude. You set the tone for everything that came after." Samuel kissed her forehead. "We took a chance on each other, and look what we created." As if in answer, a thin wail came from inside the house, Sarah waking for a nighttime feeding. Zelda sighed and started to rise, but Samuel stood first. "I will get her. You stay here and enjoy the peace for a few more minutes." Zelda watched him disappear into the house, this man who had changed her life in ways large and small, and felt a deep contentment settle over her. Their life was not perfect. There were still hard days, financial worries, the endless challenges of ranching and child rearing. But it was theirs, built on a foundation of respect, choice, and genuine love. The years continued to unfold. Stephen grew into a bright, curious boy who followed his father around the ranch, learning the cattle business from the ground up. Sarah developed a stubborn streak and a gift for gentling horses, spending hours in the stable working with even the most skittish animals. In 1888, Zelda gave birth to twin boys, which sent the ranch into a delighted uproar since everyone remembered Carl and Charlie Davis and joked about starting their own set of twin ranch hands. Through it all, Zelda never stopped cooking, though now it was as much about feeding her family as about fulfilling any job requirement. She taught her children in the kitchen, passing on the skills her mother had taught her, showing them how to create something beautiful from simple ingredients. Stephen proved to have a talent for baking, while Sarah preferred hearty stews and roasts. The ranch continued to grow and thrive. Samuel's reputation as an honest dealer and skilled cattleman spread, and they began supplying beef to larger markets in Omaha and even Kansas City. The original mortgage was paid off, and they were able to invest in improvements and expansion. Some of the original ranch hands moved on over the years. Young Jake married his sweetheart and started his own small ranch with Samuel's help. Miguel returned to Texas to care for his aging mother. though he wrote letters filled with warmth and gratitude for the years he had spent at the Barrett Ranch. The twin brothers eventually bought their own spread together, partnering to run a horse breeding operation. But Thomas stayed, growing grayer but no less competent, serving as foreman and uncle figure to the Barrett children. William Tucker retired from ranch work, but remained in a small cottage Samuel built for him on the property, spending his days carving toys for the children and offering sage advice when asked. New hands were hired, young men who learned quickly that the Barrett Ranch was a good place to work, where employees were treated fairly and respect went both ways. In 1892, when Stephen was 8 and already talking about taking over the ranch someday, Zelda made an unexpected announcement at dinner. Samuel had just finished saying grace when she cleared her throat and got everyone's attention. "I have been thinking," she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "We have been blessed with prosperity, and I believe it is time to give back to the community that has supported us." Samuel raised his eyebrows. "What did you have in mind?" "I want to open a restaurant in Wood River." "Nothing fancy, just a place where people can get a good hot meal at a fair price. Somewhere welcoming for travelers passing through, for ranch hands coming to town, for families who need a night off from cooking." The children erupted with questions and excitement, but Samuel simply smiled. "Tell me more." Over the next few months, Zelda's dream took shape. They purchased a building on Wood River's Main Street, a former boarding house that had good bones but needed work. Samuel and the ranch hands helped with renovations, building out a proper kitchen and dining area. Zelda hired 2 local women who needed work, teaching them her methods and standards. The restaurant opened in the spring of 1893, simply called Zelda's Place. It quickly became a community gathering spot, known for generous portions, reasonable prices, and food made with genuine care. Zelda split her time between the ranch and the restaurant, managing both with the organizational skills she had honed over years of running a busy household. Samuel supported her completely, never once suggesting she should stay home or that her place was only in their house. He had meant what he said all those years ago about wanting her to pursue her dreams, and he proved it through his actions. The restaurant became successful enough that Zelda eventually hired a full-time manager, allowing her to step back and only oversee operations. The income provided security for their family and created jobs in the community, and Zelda took deep satisfaction in knowing she had built something meaningful. In 1895, Wood River held its annual Harvest Festival, and Zelda was asked to organize the community supper. It was a massive undertaking, feeding hundreds of people, but she rose to the challenge with enthusiasm. Samuel and the children helped, and it became a family project that brought them even closer together. On the night of the festival, as Zelda looked out over the long tables filled with neighbors and friends, all eating food she had helped prepare, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had come so far from that frightened woman on the auction block 13 years ago. Samuel found her standing at the edge of the gathering and slipped his arm around her waist. "Penny for your thoughts." "I was just reflecting on how strange life is," Zelda said, "how a single moment can change everything. If you had not made that bid, if you had not offered me a choice, I would be living a completely different life right now." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if someone else had won the auction?" Samuel asked. Zelda turned to face him fully. "No. Because I believe we were meant to find each other. Maybe not in that exact way, but somehow our paths would have crossed. You are my partner, my best friend, the love of my life. That kind of connection does not happen by accident." Samuel pulled her close. "I love you, Zelda Barrett. Every single day, I wake up grateful that you chose to stay, chose to build a life with me." "And I love you," Zelda replied. You gave me back my dignity when I thought I had lost it. You showed me what it means to be truly valued as a person. Everything we have built together stems from that initial act of respect and kindness." They stood together watching their children play with others from town, listening to the music and laughter that filled the warm autumn evening. And Zelda felt a bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. As the children grew older, they each found their own paths while remaining connected to the ranch and the family business. Stephen did indeed take over more and more of the daily cattle operations, showing a natural aptitude for the work. Sarah surprised everyone by expressing an interest in becoming a veterinarian, a challenging path for a woman in the 1890s, but one her parents supported wholeheartedly. The twin boys showed signs of being natural businessmen, already talking about expansion and new ventures by the time they were 10. In 1898, Samuel's health gave them a scare when he came down with a serious fever that left him bedridden for weeks. Zelda nursed him through it with fierce determination, and the children took on extra responsibilities around the ranch without complaint. When Samuel finally recovered, he was thinner and tired more easily, but he was alive and whole, and that was all that mattered. The experience reminded them both that time was precious and not to be wasted. They made a conscious effort to slow down and appreciate the moments they had together: quiet mornings over coffee, evening walks across their land, time spent with their children and grandchildren as the older kids began starting families of their own. Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1900, and the entire community turned out for his funeral. He had been a fixture of the Barrett Ranch for over 20 years, and his loss was felt deeply by everyone who had known him. They buried him on the hill next to Samuel's parents, and Zelda planted wildflowers on his grave every spring. William Tucker lived to the remarkable age of 85, finally passing in 1902, surrounded by the family who had adopted him as their own. His cottage on the ranch remained preserved as he had left it, a memorial to a good man who had shown kindness to a frightened young woman at her wedding. As the new century progressed, the world began to change in ways both exciting and unsettling. Automobiles appeared on the streets of Wood River, the railroad expanded its routes, and electricity began reaching even rural areas. The Barrett Ranch adapted, installing modern conveniences while still maintaining the core values that had always defined it. Stephen married a sensible young woman named Elizabeth in 1903, and they gave Zelda and Samuel their first grandchild in 1904, a beautiful baby girl named Zelda after her grandmother. Holding that tiny infant, seeing her son beam with the same joy Samuel had shown when their children were born, Zelda felt the continuity of family and love stretching forward into the future. Sarah defied convention by attending veterinary college in Omaha, one of only 3 women in her class. She faced discrimination and skepticism, but she persevered, earning her degree in 1906 and returning to Wood River to set up a practice. The local ranchers were initially dubious about a female veterinarian, but Sarah proved herself through skill and dedication, eventually becoming the most sought-after animal doctor in the region. The twins, Joshua and James, went into business together as their parents had always suspected they would, starting a freight company that served the ranches and towns across Nebraska. They proved to have inherited their mother's business acumen and their father's integrity, and their company flourished. Through all these changes and milestones, Zelda and Samuel remained each other's anchors. They celebrated 30 years of marriage in 1913 with a big party at the ranch, surrounded by children, grandchildren, friends, and neighbors. Zelda looked around at the gathered crowd and marveled at the community they had built, the lives they had touched, the legacy they were creating. "What are you thinking?" Samuel asked, coming up beside her with 2 glasses of lemonade. "I am thinking about the miracle of small kindnesses," Zelda said, accepting the glass. "How your single act of decency 30 years ago rippled outward to affect all these people. Our children, our grandchildren, the employees at the restaurant, the ranch hands who have come through here over the years. You changed so many lives by simply choosing to treat one desperate woman with respect." Samuel shook his head. "We changed them together, Zelda. Everything we built as partners." "True," she acknowledged, "but it started with you. With your refusal to treat me as property, your insistence that I have a choice. That set the tone for everything that followed." As evening fell and the party continued around them, they slipped away for a few minutes of quiet, walking out to their favorite spot by the creek where Samuel had proposed so many years ago. The bridge had been rebuilt several times, but the location remained special to them. "Do you know what I think about when I come here?" Samuel asked, his arm around Zelda's shoulders. "Tell me." "I think about how terrified I was that day, convinced you would say no. I had been working up the courage to propose for weeks, and I kept imagining all the ways you might reject me. After all, I was just the man who bought your contract. Why would you want to tie yourself to me permanently?" Zelda laughed softly. "And I was standing here thinking the opposite, that surely you could not really want to marry a woman you had purchased at an auction, that this must be some kind of obligation or pity." "We were both fools," Samuel said affectionately. "Young fools," Zelda corrected. "We knew so little about love back then. We have learned so much since." They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the creek burble and watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. After 3 decades together, they had long ago learned the value of quiet companionship, of simply being together without needing to fill every moment with words. In 1915, the ranch celebrated another milestone. It had been in the Barrett family for 40 years and was now completely debt-free with a solid reputation as one of the premier cattle operations in Nebraska. Samuel was 60 years old now, his hair silver and his face weathered by years of sun and wind. But he was still active and engaged in the ranch's operations. Zelda was 58, her dark hair streaked with gray, but her energy and passion for life undimmed. She had handed over day-to-day management of the restaurant years ago, but still consulted on major decisions, and occasionally came in to cook when the spirit moved her. Her real focus now was on her growing family, 5 grandchildren with more on the way, and on the various charitable works she had taken up in the community. They had established a fund to help women in difficult circumstances, quietly providing support to those who found themselves in situations similar to what Zelda had faced. They never advertised their charity, but word got around, and over the years, they helped dozens of women get training, find employment, or escape dangerous situations. One cold December day in 1915, a young woman appeared at the Barrett ranch asking for Zelda. She was thin and desperate-looking, with a small child clinging to her skirts, and she explained that someone in town had told her Mrs. Barrett might be able to help. Zelda invited her inside, got her settled with hot food and coffee, and listened to her story. It was heartbreakingly familiar. A husband who drank and turned violent, money running out, nowhere to go and no family to turn to. The woman was a skilled seamstress but had no way to set up a business without capital. "What is your name?" Zelda asked gently. "Anna Foster, madam." "And this is my daughter, Emma. She is 5. Zelda looked at the little girl, who was shyly eating a biscuit, and then at Anna's desperate, hopeful face. She saw herself in this woman, saw the same fear and determination, the same will to survive despite impossible circumstances. "Here is what we are going to do," Zelda said firmly. "You and Emma are going to stay in our guest cottage for now. You are going to take the time you need to rest and recover. Then we are going to set you up with a sewing machine and materials, and you are going to start your seamstress business. We will spread the word that you are available for work, and I guarantee you will have more customers than you can handle." Anna's eyes filled with tears. "Madam, I could not possibly accept such charity." "It is not charity," Zelda corrected gently. "It is investment. I am investing in you, in your skills, in your future. Someday, when you are established and successful, you will do the same for another woman who needs help. That is how we break these cycles of desperation." Over the following months, Anna and Emma became part of the extended Barrett Ranch family. Anna's seamstress business did indeed thrive, and she was able to secure a divorce from her abusive husband and build an independent life for herself and her daughter. Years later, Anna would pay forward the kindness she had received, helping other women in need and always crediting Zelda Barrett with saving her life. Samuel watched his wife's charitable works with pride and support, often helping in practical ways by providing employment to men who needed fresh starts or extending credit to struggling families. The Barrett Ranch became known not just for its cattle and horses, but for its commitment to the community and its willingness to help those in need. In 1918, the world was at war, and even Wood River, Nebraska, felt the effects. Young men from the community, including the Barrett's twin sons Joshua and James, enlisted to serve. It was a terrifying time for Zelda and Samuel, worrying about their boys overseas, praying for their safe return. The war years were difficult, with rationing and shortages and the constant background fear for the men in uniform. Zelda channeled her anxiety into action, organizing support efforts for the troops and coordinating care packages from the community. The restaurant in town became a gathering place for families with loved ones overseas, a place where they could share news and support each other. When the war finally ended in November 1918, the community erupted in relieved celebration. The Barrett twins came home safely, though changed by what they had seen and experienced. They were quieter, more serious, but they were alive and whole, and Zelda thanked God for that blessing every single day. The 1920s brought new prosperity and new challenges. The ranch continued to adapt to changing times, incorporating new technologies and methods while staying true to its core values. Stephen was now firmly established as the primary manager of the cattle operation, though Samuel remained involved in major decisions and still rode out to check on the herd regularly, despite his advancing years. Sarah's veterinary practice had expanded to serve multiple counties, and she had taken on 2 younger vets as partners, including one other woman who credited Sarah's example with inspiring her career choice. The twins' freight company had weathered the post-war economic adjustments and was thriving, now employing over 30 people. Zelda's restaurant in Wood River had been operating for over 30 years and had become an institution in the community. It had survived economic downturns, the war years, and changes in management, remaining a constant source of good food and warm welcome. In the summer of 1925, Zelda and Samuel celebrated their 43rd wedding anniversary quietly at home, just the two of them. Their children had offered to throw a party, but they had declined, preferring to spend the day together in simple companionship. They sat on the porch swing as the sun set, holding hands and watching the light fade across the prairie they both loved so much. Samuel was 70 now, still sharp-minded but moving more slowly, his body bearing the accumulated aches of decades of hard physical labor. Zelda was 68, her hair completely white now, but her eyes still bright with intelligence and warmth. 43 years, Samuel said softly. Where did the time go? Into children and grandchildren, into building and growing, into loving and living, Zelda replied. I would not change a single moment of it. Not even the auction, Samuel asked with a slight smile. Zelda considered the question seriously. Not even that. Because as frightening and humiliating as it was in the moment, it brought me to you. And you, Samuel Barrett, are worth every moment of fear and uncertainty I ever experienced. Samuel raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. I am the one who got the better end of that bargain. $100 was the best investment I ever made. I was not an investment, Zelda said with mock indignation. I was a person. You were and are a magnificent person, Samuel corrected. The love of my life, the mother of my children, my partner in all things. I meant what I said the day I brought you here, Zelda. You have never had to cook unless you wanted to. Everything you have done, you have chosen freely. I know, Zelda said, leaning her head on his shoulder. That is what made all the difference. You gave me agency over my own life. And from that foundation, we built something beautiful. They sat together as the stars emerged, comfortable in the silence of long familiarity, grateful for the life they had created, and the love that had sustained them through 4 decades of joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges. Samuel passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1928, just a few months shy of his 73rd birthday. Zelda woke one morning to find him still beside her, his face peaceful, his suffering over. Her grief was profound. They had been together for 45 years, and he had been the center of her world, but she took comfort in knowing he had lived a good life, surrounded by love, and had died without pain. The funeral was enormous, with people traveling from across the state to pay their respects to a man who had lived with integrity and kindness. Samuel was buried on the hill beside his parents and Thomas, and Zelda stood beside the grave surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, drawing strength from the family they had created together. In the months after Samuel's death, Zelda considered what she wanted to do with the rest of her life. She was 70 years old, still healthy and active, but the ranch felt empty without Samuel's presence. Stephen and Elizabeth had moved into the main house years ago and were running the operation beautifully. Zelda's other children were established in their own lives and careers. She decided to focus her energy on expanding the charitable work she and Samuel had started. She formalized the fund they had created to help women in need, establishing it as an official foundation with board members and structured processes. The Samuel Barrett Foundation, as she named it, would continue the work of providing support and opportunities to those facing desperate circumstances. Zelda also spent more time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on stories of their heritage, teaching them the values that had guided her and Samuel's life together. She wanted them to understand that their prosperity had come not from luck or accident, but from hard work, integrity, and a commitment to treating all people with dignity. In 1932, at the age of 75, Zelda published a small memoir about her life, focusing particularly on the early years and how one act of kindness had changed everything. She wrote about the auction, about Samuel's offer of choice, about building a life and a family on a foundation of mutual respect. The book circulated mainly in Nebraska, but touched many hearts, and Zelda received letters from women across the country sharing their own stories of struggle and triumph. The years of the Great Depression were difficult for everyone, including the Barrett family. The ranch struggled with low cattle prices. Drought conditions made ranching even more challenging than usual, and many people in the community faced genuine hardship. But the Barrett Ranch, built on years of sound management and careful savings, was able to weather the storm and even continue providing employment when other operations were failing. Zelda used the foundation to help as many people as she could, providing food, temporary housing, and job training to those hit hardest by the economic crisis. The restaurant in Wood River became a place where people could get a hot meal even if they could not afford to pay, with Zelda quietly covering the difference. Through it all, Zelda held fast to the values she and Samuel had built their life around, that every person deserved dignity, that kindness was never wasted, that the measure of a life was not in wealth accumulated but in lives touched and helped. In 1938, Zelda turned 81, and the family threw a massive celebration at the ranch. Nearly 200 people attended, including children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, former ranch hands, restaurant employees, and people whose lives had been touched by her charitable work. It was a beautiful summer day, and as Zelda looked out over the gathered crowd, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Stephen stood to give a toast, his own hair now gray, his children grown with children of their own. "To my mother," he said, his voice carrying across the assembly, "who taught us that where you start in life matters less than what you do with the opportunities you are given, who showed us that true strength comes from lifting others up, who built a legacy of love and kindness that will continue for generations." Everyone raised their glasses, and Zelda felt tears stream down her face, happy tears, grateful tears. That evening, after most of the guests had departed, Zelda walked out to the hill where Samuel was buried. She sat on the bench Stephen had placed there years ago and looked out over the land that had been her home for over 50 years. "We did well, did we not?" she said aloud, speaking to Samuel as she often did. "Look at what we built, my love. Not just the ranch or the businesses, but the family, the community, the ripples of kindness spreading outward." The wind rustled through the grass, and Zelda imagined it was Samuel's answer, his agreement and pride. She lived 3 more years, remaining active and engaged until the very end. She died in her sleep in December 1941, surrounded by the family who loved her, in the house that had become her true home. She was 84 years old, and she had lived a life of meaning and purpose, transforming one moment of humiliation into decades of dignity, love, and service. They buried her beside Samuel on the hill, and the entire community mourned the loss of a woman who had touched so many lives. The Barrett Ranch continued under Stephen's management and would pass to his children and grandchildren, always operated with the values Zelda and Samuel had instilled. The restaurant in Wood River remained a gathering place for another 50 years. The Samuel Barrett Foundation continued its work helping women in need, expanding its reach far beyond Nebraska. But perhaps the most important legacy was the story itself, passed down through generations of Barrett family members and shared in the wider community. It was the story of a woman who stood on an auction block expecting to be sold into servitude and instead found a man who offered her choice. It was the story of how that single act of respect and dignity became the foundation for a love that lasted 45 years and spawned a dynasty built on kindness and integrity. It was the story of Zelda Lawrence, who was auctioned for her cooking skills alone, and Samuel Barrett, the cowboy who bid and said, "Cook only if you want to." And it was the story of how they built a life together that proved, beyond any doubt, that treating people with dignity and allowing them agency over their own lives was not just the right thing to do, it was the foundation upon which all truly good things were built. Their great-great-grandchildren still run the Barrett Ranch in the 21st century. And in the main house, prominently displayed, is a framed copy of that original labor contract from 1882, alongside a photograph of Zelda and Samuel on their 40th wedding anniversary. Visitors always ask about the contract, and the family always tells the story, keeping alive the memory of two people who showed that love, respect, and simple human kindness can change the world, one choice at a time.